and welcome to the Women Series program where we capture developments and stories that impact women. My name is Ayomide Oguntoye. It is the third week of July and there is still some level of scarcity in the oil and gas sector across some states in the Federation. What are the fundamental factors responsible for the scarcity, and most importantly, what are the opportunities for development in the midstream and downstream of the oil and gas sector? Today, I'm speaking with Tengi George-Ikoli, a lawyer and a senior officer at the Natural Resource Governance Institute. Hello, Tengi. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. How's the day been?
It's been very well, thank you.
Yeah. So considering the oil and gas sector today, and there's been so much consideration and deliberation around the removal of fuel subsidy. Now, what is your perspective on the calls from MOMAN, LCCI, and the private sector for PMS subsidy removal? And what are the implications for the populace?
This is not the first time that we're getting calls to remove subsidy on PMS. And usually this tends to come up when there's a realization of the shortage in revenues potentially that the country needs for development. The challenge with subsidy on PMS is not that there's a subsidy, but that the subsidy is being placed on consumption. Nigeria currently has a budget expectation of about 3.5 trillion naira in its budget as expected revenues from oil for 2022 budget. And then now you have had an expenditure of 4 trillion naira on subsidy. What does that tell you? Nigeria depends on its revenues from oil to service 50% of its budgets. So essentially that aspect is now wiped out. What can Nigeria do given that it has a high dependency on oil? How can it seek to fill out those revenues? Secondly, regardless of that, you still see the queues are still long consistently. You have Nigerians who need to feed their families, spending 10 hours of productive time on queues. How does that benefit the Nigerian person? It is better for funds to be spent in ways that can actually benefit Nigerians instead of in ways that actually harm them.
But the layman does not understand that this is going to be of a good than the bad. In terms of arming or not arming them. If a layman is listening to this now, would probably not even understand all that you just said now. Now, what we probably would understand is how we can possibly reduce the reliance on PMS on our transport system. Is it even possible that we reduce the reliance on PMS in our transport system?
There are different ways to ensure that the reduction on reliance on PMS potentially affects or works for Nigeria. Nigeria has, for the longest time, relied on its PMS for its petrol, for its cars, for transportation. But recently, you've had the government considering other options, looking at gas, looking at CNG specifically, to replace that. Other countries across the world are looking at electric vehicles. Nigeria is clearly far away from that aspect, but there are options that are available, and what we need is to put the revenues necessary to develop the knowledge, to develop the skills, to develop the value chain elements to ensure that Nigeria is able to key into that aspect. Because again, another component is that Nigeria depends on foreign companies or foreign countries to refine our oil. What happens while we haven't fully strengthened our own refining locally? When we still have to depend on that, we will actually have no PMS as the world continues to evolve beyond oil.
In your own assessment, do you think that Nigeria is ready for that transition?
I believe Nigeria has to be ready for that transition because it really doesn't have any other option. The world is moving away from oil, and what that means is in the long term, Nigeria will not have the revenues that it currently anticipates and relies on to service its economy, to collect in foreign exchange revenues, and that has a knock-on effect on its economy. It has a knock-on effect on its currency. It has a knock-on effect on how Nigerians in Aba market, for instance, are able to get foreign exchange to continue their businesses. So it's an even larger conversation than just looking at PMS transition for transportation.
Okay, right. Now, I know that you mentioned gas as an alternative for PMS as well. I mean, when it comes to our transport system. So what will be your assessment, or what is your assessment of the role of the NCDMB in deepening the Nigeria's local content production, especially in the gas market?
So the NCMDB has a very critical role to play in aiding Nigeria in this transition away from oil to gas, which Nigeria is considering as a transition fuel to renewables, and also in renewables. A lot of conversation is not being had in terms of how Nigeria can make that transition in terms of its short-term goals, its medium-term goals, and its long-term goals. NCMDB has a key role to play in learning the lessons from other countries in terms of how they've been able to accelerate their local content so that Nigerians are able to play a bigger role, and we're able to keep most of the gains locally as well, which is very critical. Most of Nigerians' gas is associated gas, and so that is attached to its oil development as well. When the oil majors potentially leave, and if national companies are unable to take its place, who will then play that intermediary role? So it's very critical that Nigerians are able to build that capacity, but also ensuring that they include ways in which their projects can also have energy transition components. So how do we also reduce carbon emissions as well as they are using gas as a transition fuel? These are all important means and modes that can also enable those local content Nigerians to also attract the funding that they will need to tap into gas while the sun still sets for it.
Right. I mean, you've spoken about the part of the NCMDB. And are there other things that you think that Nigerians must do? I mean, when I mean Nigerians now, I mean Nigeria everybody, the populace. What do you think that Nigerians should do as well to achieve a full transition to a gas-fueled economy, since that is where it is leading towards to?
As I mentioned earlier, that is a very critical point, but also Nigeria is looking at gas as a transition fuel to renewables. So it's not the end of the line, but it is the way forward. The main concern for Nigerians and Nigeria is energy access. Right now, you and I are having this conversation and it's being powered. We're not really concerned whether it's being powered by oil, gas, or renewables, or whatever the case might be. So what Nigerians need to also collaboratively work on is to make sure that they're open and they start to demand for energy access that comes from renewables, potentially gas and transiting. Women specifically have a challenge when it comes to access to energy. The dirtier energy like kerosene for cooking, etc., is usually used on women or affected by women as well. So women play a key role in ensuring that we also transit to ensure health benefits that will downplay towards women as well. We have to make sure that there's a general conversation being had. It will take everybody to transit. Private sector to provide funding, the government to put the policies and the enablers in place, the communities to make sure that they are also having conversations to see how they can use these petrols as well, and these different energy sources as well. So everyone needs to come together. We need to consider what the energy mix is going to be for Nigeria and how that works for our economy and people as a whole.
Right. Thank you very much. I hope we've been able to break down this conversation, because to the layman, so they would be able to understand that it takes the effort of everybody collectively to transit from what we think that it's becoming like a nerve-wracking situation to a more sustainable situation. Thank you very much, Tengi, for coming on the program. I hope you had a good time explaining this to us.
Thank you for having me.
And that will be all for this episode of the Women Series program. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can send the mail to ayomide.oguntoye@proshare.co. Remember to follow us on our social media platforms showing on the screen. And until next time, thank you for watching.